Hello, everyone. So, today on our show, we have Dr. Aniruddha Malpani, who is an extremely well known figure. Needs no introduction. However, I'll still try to capture his magnanimous persona in a few lines. Dr. Malpani is an innovative IVF specialist who passed out of Bombay University and has won more than 20 medals in his academic career.
Guys, clap for me. But that was long back, so I don't think it carries much weight. And in fact, I'm a big believer right now that, all this schooling and these education stuff, when I was younger, it was really important. So obviously, I gave me bragging rights, and more importantly, gave my parents bragging rights about see how smart my son is. I'm not really so sure that's so important anymore. But sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. So Dr. Malpani and his lovely wife, Dr. Anjali Malpani, have written a number of books and they use innovative technology to educate their patients and to create awareness. Dr. Malpani is also a prolific angel investor, and his investment outfit, Malpani Ventures, has invested in sectors like edtech, health tech, and more recently, they've been focusing heavily on B2B SaaS companies. He's been a part of the ecosystem for so long that I'm hoping he'll be able to share how the ecosystem has evolved over time. So let's hear from Dr. Malpani. Welcome to the show, Dr. Malpani.
Anuradha, the only problem with being interviewed by someone like you is you're so much more good looking than I am. तो मुझे कोई देखेगा नहीं सुनने की तो बात छोड़. So I need to do something about this. But
No, you let me know. I'll switch off my video whenever you want.
No, I'm just kidding. No, go ahead.
So
मतलब
before
इस बहाने तो कम से कम कोई देखेगा. हाँ ठीक है चलो डॉक्टर मालपानी को कोई सुनेगा नहीं लेकिन अनुराधा को तो देखेंगे. So that's fine. Go ahead.
So before we begin, I would love for you to give us a quick sense of where Malpani Ventures is today in terms of number of portfolio companies and how you guys have evolved over time in terms of check sizes, investment thesis. That will be interesting to understand.
Sure. So I don't think we ever, the intention, if you'd asked me this maybe 10 years ago, and I'd said we no intent of starting something like Malpani Ventures. And a lot of this evolves, adapts, becomes organic. So it's one of those things which happened and happened for multiple reasons. I've been an angel investor for many, many years. So that was angel investing is relatively simple. You sign checks and you wait for people to get back to you. But over time, I realized there were huge gaps in my knowledge. And being a part of Mumbai Angels network in those days was very helpful because I realized how much I didn't know. There were so many smarter people in the room who would ask interesting questions. This was impressive. A lot of people asked, you're a doctor. Why did you ever become an investor in the first place? And the answer is actually to keep up with my daughter. So it's true, you learn from your parents, you learn from your wife, you learn from your kids. Hopefully, at some point, I'll learn from my grandkids as well. Depends on how long I live, of course. But so so both my wife and I are doctors. We understand a lot about medicine. Did understand a lot about profit and loss and EBITDA and all those financial statements. And actually, as a doctor, you tend to look down a lot of these things. Commercial, who wants to be a bean counter? Honestly, I didn't even know what the difference in capex and opex was. So we filed income tax returns every year, but the CA did that. And every year you would ask, "Ye kisme dalu, kisme dalu?" I said, "To joke karne ka kar." So I didn't even understand a lot of that stuff. But when my daughter, she decided to follow her own path, and finally she started working for a firm in London, which was called Big Society Capital, which is a fund of funds that they would fund social impact startups in England. Very large fund. And she was one of the first few people whom they hired. And then I needed to understand what she was doing and why she was doing it. So, social impact has always been something which has been close to my heart. My parents have always been philanthropists. But how do you organize that in a great way? So, therefore, I had to learn about angel investing. One of my friends introduced me, and then gradually over time, it became more and more interesting. And I love learning about stuff. And this was cutting edge, new stuff. I think it gives you a lot of emotional kick and a lot of joy. Hasn't made me any money. I don't even think it's ever going to make me any money, but that's a different thing. So I have buckets in my life as to what belongs where. So over time, because we're doing so many investments, you weren't tracking them very well, which is a big problem. And if after all this is money, and if you're not tracking, you're not doing a good job. So you selectively remember your successes. You selectively forget all the ones which don't do well. So where's the learning happening? Unless you measure your performance, you're not going to learn, you're not going to become any better. So that's the reason why we started Malpani Ventures. not something I understand too much about. So I had a very good friend who runs Solidarity, who's an MBA from IIM, worked for Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, now manages my listed equity, and I arm twisted him. I said, "This is what I want to do. I don't know how to do it." So he said, "I don't want to do this, but you're my friend, and I don't want to see you burn your money. So we'll set it up." So now we have analysts, we have a proper setup. I won't say it's institutionalized, but it's organized so that
Hmm.
we have a particular format, which gives me a lot of comfort. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What did we learn? How do we make fewer mistakes? We'll always make mistakes, but as long as they're different mistakes, I don't mind. So it's evolved over time. And therefore, my ability to back entrepreneurs has improved. My big problem is I fall in love with the entrepreneur. And then
Hmm.
you become very irrational and you end up doing stupid things, which is fine, but that's not the best way of deploying money.
Correct.
And therefore, the team, keeps me grounded, stops me from doing stupid things, which is helpful. And the other thing which has happened is God has been kind. A lot of the money I have available to invest has increased considerably. And
Hmm.
the reason it's increased considerably is simply because the listed markets in India have been so kind that I would never invest the money I earn as an IVF specialist in startups.
Hmm.
This is hard earned money, blood, sweat, tears. So that's not money you would put in a startup because the reality is most startups will fail. But I mean, I understand money is fungible, money is money, but still the money which is passive income, which
Hmm.
comes from, TCS went up or whatever went up is like, I'm not saying easy come, easy go, and I'm not saying I'm burning it, but it's kind of easier to deploy that money in startups and you don't get heartburn when the startups don't do so well. So I always tell people, startups may look cool, but only invest the money which you can afford to lose without losing sleep over.
Correct.
It's not a get rich quick. It's actually somewhere anywhere from 5 to 10 years. I think part of the problem is there's been so much hype about the startup space. And the hype is because the people who pay for the startup media is the VCs, who obviously need entrepreneurs to come to them. They need more, I won't say bakras, but they need more high net individuals to, go and give them more money. So that's the nature of the beast. That's fine. Which is why the mortality rate amongst angel investors is so high. Everyone does it. Oh, I'm so smart. I know all this stuff. I'm happy to be a mentor. I'm happy to be a guide. I'm happy to do this. And then over 5 years, they realize how little they know. And then once they burn their fingers, they don't do it a second and third time, which is sad.
Hmm.
Because if they have unrealistic expectations, I think that creates a problem. Then it kind of gets a bad reputation. So, it's not right, it's all cheating, that kind of stuff. And it's not. It's as long as you understand what you're doing, I think it's fine. It's so therefore you need to step back. And therefore I'm fairly clear about asset allocation, diversification. So I said most of my money is going to come from the listed space. And that's partly because India is growing, the markets are doing well. I don't invest on my own because I don't understand stuff. But I have PMS managers who are experts, so you can track the IRR, and they're all fundamental investors. So I understand that. That's Danda business. The surplus which I get, my needs are fairly simple. Uh, you know, uh, what can I say? I mean, I'm not really out to prove anything to anyone. So there's a lot of surplus money. So what do you do with that? And it gives me a lot of joy investing that money in startups whom I think can change the world for the better. So startups belong to my emotional income category. Does that make
Okay.
any sense?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Makes perfect sense. And in terms of numbers, Dr. Malpani, today, how many portfolio companies would you have?
I think about 20, 20. Honestly, I don't keep a track on any of this stuff. So I always tell people I have the easy job. I just sign the checks. मुझे और तो कुछ करना नहीं पड़ता. I don't have to do the due diligence. I don't have to check the MISs. I don't have to follow up with entrepreneurs or anything else because that's something the team does. So it's not even something I'm good at. I don't even like micromanaging people. So at some point you take a leap of faith. You say, I trust this person. Person may do well, may not do well. I don't care about outcomes. I only care about the process and let the team manage all the other stuff which needs to be managed. I'm not saying, we don't do it, but it's not something which I do. And that's the reason why we do everything in public. So the right way to answer that question is, just go to Malpani Ventures. Our website is everything. The startups we funded, which have failed, which have shut down, the zombie ones, the ones which have done well, all that stuff's there.
I did actually, and I saw 24 portfolio companies there, but I thought
We're still
maybe.
in the process of, yeah, so that'll keep on happening. And very honestly, I think that number will increase. Like I said, we're willing to sign bigger checks, we're willing to take on more risks. I'm fairly vocal about a lot of stuff. So I'm kind of attracting the startups who perhaps are not of interest to VCs. These are the
Got.
ones who care about creating a business which adds value to customers. These
Hmm.
aren't the ones who are looking to, rocket ship growth and how do I get an exit. We're happy to get, again, and I tell people, I'm not doing this to waste money. I'm doing this in order to earn. But my thesis is that if I back the right guys, I will be able to earn more. But I'm no success stories. Please don't believe anything I say. I just do it because it works for me. And I think that's the lesson I want to tell people.
Hmm.
What works for me will not work for you. So please do not copy and paste what anyone else does. The trouble is that you have all these hero stories. This is what the Ola founder did, and this is what this did, and therefore going to do the same thing. That's ridiculous. So most likely the Ola founder tries the same thing again, it mostly won't work, and he will tell you that himself. And therefore you need to remember that you've got to do what works for you. You can't really just say, okay, fine, this is what Dr. Malpani is doing. And that's a big problem. A lot of people try to copy other people, but just because it worked for them, they're wired in a particular way, their needs are different, the way they behave is different. You can't just ride on someone else's coattails.
So, just for the audience's benefit, Dr. Malpani was the first investor who supported me, who backed me. And since then, he's been one of my biggest mentors. And the one thing that I've learned from him is to live purposefully. Whatever he does with a lot of self awareness. He has a clear thesis behind his
Please
actions.
tell my wife that, Anuradha. She thinks I'm an idiot. So, what are you doing with all these startups and where is this money going? And do you even know what you're doing? So, she doesn't have much confidence in my. So, I definitely need one of these guys to do very, very well. And then she'll say, okay, fine. You're not as dumb as I thought you were. But
Dr. Anjali is a very sharp lady and she understands everything, but she just tries to keep you grounded, Dr. Malpani. That's my theory.
true, true.
But I understand that your definition of success is very different from the general success definition that we have in the ecosystem. And which is why I'm not going to ask you to share any stories of any success stories from your portfolio companies, but I would definitely want you to share a couple of stories where, because I understand your entire point of investing is to learn, right? So one of the few startup stories from where you had the maximum learning from, like, from their journeys, you derived a lot of learning. I would love to hear some of those stories.
So, two things. I think what you're saying is absolutely right about the learning piece. That's where the joy of investing comes in, that, when you get counterintuitive insights. And one of our big picture thesis is that today's startups are going to become tomorrow's blue chip companies. Some of them, at least, may not be the ones I invest in, unfortunately. That's different. I'm not that smart that I can identify them. But the whole point is that, it's like breaking it up into school. First standard, say second, say third, say fourth. That's ridiculous. I mean, it's a continuum. You learn all along the process. So some fifth standard kids are smarter than 10 standard kids, but because our educational system is so assembly line, we slot them into this kind of age groups and stuff. And we tend to do that with businesses, which, if you stop to think about it, is very illogical. Why do we treat a seed stage startup differently from Series A, as differently from a listed company, or a different from a, it's basically a life cycle, is my point. And because it's a life cycle, there's a lot you can learn. You can learn a lot about investing in mature companies by talking to startup founders, because they have a lot of domain expertise. They will provide you with a lot of counterintuitive insights, which will tell you what works, what doesn't work, how do you, which hopefully, like I said, they may very well fold in the process, but you will be able to learn that to identify the companies whom they respect in the listed space. So one of the things, for example, if I'm investing in, let's say, a fintech company, I'll ask an entrepreneur, which is the listed fintech company, or which is a listed company which you respect, and why. And that's going to give me a lot more insight into, whom I should be backing rather than someone else. And it also works the other way, because you can't talk to promoters of listed companies because they don't have the time to talk to you. But at some point, 10 years in the past, they were also startup founders. They've also been through that journey. So your ability to emotionally connect with them, because you're also part of the startup space, becomes a little bit better. So I think that's where some of the emotional equations come in. to your point, what did I learn? I learned I'm not as bright as I thought I was, very honestly. It's not so much an individual company, but obviously you put in money because you think that company is going to do well. But the reality, shit happens all the time. So I've realized I'm not a very good judge of character. I cannot identify who's going to, do well, who's not, who's going to stab me in the back, which team of co-founders is going to fight with each other, uh, which is going to be adaptable, which is going to grow very, very hard. But I always say these are valuable lessons. And the reason they're valuable is I can apply them for the future. And in a way, I'm very grateful to all the startups which have failed because you tend to learn far more from them because you want those mistakes stick in your head. And you definitely don't want to make some of those mistakes again. So, to that extent, but I think a lot of these startups, I think I've learned a lot from you. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be praising you on this
Yes, please.
podcast. So therefore, no, so I don't think that's a very good idea. But, honestly, the ability to be able to do that I have a lot of respect for two two groups of people. I have a lot of respect for women entrepreneurs. I want to fund because I think the hurdles which women entrepreneurs have to cross in order to become a founder are 10 times steeper than a man's. You had to manage your family, manage expectations, do all kinds of things. You're always treated as a pretty
Quite
face.
stereotypes.
So that
You have,
again,
you have to fight a lot of stereotypes.
so it's just so much harder, and then someone still has the guts to do it. Full marks. So like I think most of these women entrepreneurs are at least twice as bright. It's not very hard to be twice as bright as a male entrepreneur, incidentally, but she's not laughing, which means she missed the joke. But forget it. But so that's one. And the second I really keen about are what I call failed entrepreneurs. Because they've learned a lot, hopefully on someone else's time, not mine. So they won't repeat those same set of mistakes. And I actually prefer older entrepreneurs, people who are 35, 40, have some maturity, have some experience, understand what makes people tick. So I don't get very enthused with, I think all these 20-year-olds and stuff. And I'm not saying I wouldn't invest in them, but I won't get very carried away necessarily, which is good. Because then those are the kind of entrepreneurs I look for who other people aren't necessarily looking for. So there's not that much competition, so to say. So if they understand the value I bring, and if I respect them, hopefully they'll respect me back. But again, all this is work in progress.
Sure. You talked about, missing out on what might go wrong. You must have seen a lot of things going wrong with your portfolio companies, Dr. Malpani, over time, over this 10-year period journey where you've invested in 2025 startups. Would you care to share on a no-name basis a few mistakes that you've seen founders commonly making? And I'm sure it would have evolved over time. Like the mistakes that founders were making back in 2010 would be different from the mistakes founders were making back in 2020 to the mistakes they're making now. Would you like to shed some light over that?
I think founders get very carried away by media hype. And this guy got a valuation of so much, and I'm that he had two IIT founders. I have four IIT founders. Therefore, my valuation should be much more and all kinds. And they get hung up on all the wrong stuff. And that's very hard. So usually what happens is I don't tell them what to do, but I do tell them, don't trust me. But please read this book because this book has been written by someone who has a lot more experience and expertise than I have. And he's not coloring it. He doesn't have any hidden agenda or any vested interest. And perhaps this book will help you think a little more clearly. I think some of the thing which causes me a lot of heartburn is that when founders fight with each other. And that happens amazingly, surprisingly common. You expect that these guys are buddy, and then when something goes wrong, they split apart, hard to manage. The other thing which bugs me a lot is when founders don't share information, especially when things aren't going well. That's fine, I mean, it's okay. Like I said before, we're big boys. We understand that the mortality rate with startups is high. That's the nature of the beast. They are fragile, and that's okay. But I don't like it when people don't share that with us. We trusted you. If things aren't going well, tell us. Maybe we'll tell you, maybe you should try this. Maybe we'll help you. Maybe we won't. But there's no need to be ashamed about that. And this is some of the problems. So I think one is very unrealistic expectations of valuation. And my biggest complaint is they're very unempathetic. In the sense, we try to empathize with entrepreneurs. We understand that it's a difficult battle. Hey, give me a break and try to empathize with me. This is hard-earned money. कोई ऊपर से टपका नहीं है.
Yeah.
Just imagine I were your father-in-law. How would
Hmm.
you ask for money? How would you justify it? You can't just ask for, yeah, I'm worth $1 million because so and so, got $1 million. None of that is very sensible. So that's the other thing. So I have a lot of respect for bootstrap founders, for example,
Hmm.
because they've been through there. They understand the value of money. They've used their money. They focus on adding value to customers. And that's the kind of call it boring startups, call it dhanda business startups. These are not going to be your exponential growth, and that's fine with me. And the reason that's fine with me is you can only thrive if you survive. So as long as you continue growing linearly, at some point you may very well start growing exponentially. No one in the world can predict that. The
Hmm.
future is uncertain and unpredictable. And pouring money into a startup in order to force it to grow exponentially is stupid. It doesn't work. That exponential tipping point is not something which an investor can engineer, neither can an entrepreneur. That happens when the environment changes. And who knows what's going to change and why it's going to change. And some large company takes a liking to what you've done and wants to acquire you and gives you 10x or whatever. All that is just too random as far as I'm concerned. So what's interesting is some things haven't changed.
Hmm.
Human behavior hasn't changed. Now, there are times when there's lots of money available, so people's expectations of valuation are crazy. There are times when money is not available and people's expectations of valuations are much more realistic. But I said a lot of that is just external environment. Uh, so all I tell my founders is we've respected you. Just respect us back. Don't
Hmm.
make me chase you for a monthly MIS. We're not asking you because we're counting. Oh, we don't interest in micromanaging. We don't know how to micromanage you because we don't understand that domain. That's why we gave you the money because we trust you. But the least you can do is share on a monthly basis. Because we have a 30,000 foot view, we can identify leading indicators. We can tell you where you're likely to go wrong. It's just that we've seen so many more failures than you have. So, you might as well just utilize our expertise. And some people get it and some people don't. And that bothers me in the sense, before you get the check, you're very sweet and you're very responsive and, there's that and the other. And after you got the check, you changed. I don't
Yes,
like.
person. Huh. No, that's a very real problem. And in fact, I think that is where a lot of entrepreneurs also go wrong because then they focus on vanity metrics. Then they are always focusing on projecting a wrong persona in public because the theory of, fake it till you make it, they think that they're doing the right thing. They're doing it for the growth of their business, but ultimately they're harming themselves because they're not sharing openly and they'll not have too many solutions to the problems they're facing because they're not sharing their problems.
I think
So,
you said it so well. I think we're so enamored by the Silicon Valley success stories. And I
hmm,
stupid. We are not Silicon Valley. And I don't even think we should actually get there because honestly, I think a lot of that is just greedy, predatory capitalism, which is not perhaps the best way, not even for the US, forget about for India. But our reality is very different.
hmm,
We have lots of people who are price sensitive, but more than price sensitive, they're very value conscious. As long as you give them value, there's no shortage of consumers in India, but you've got to be able to do that. You've got to think like your user does. You have to respect your user. And I think a lot of times the problem is they respect the investor more than they respect the user. And
hmm.
what's even worse is they respect the new investor more than they respect the old existing investor. तो यार तो ये तो ठीक है उसने तो पैसा दे दिया अभी नया पैसा कहाँ से आने वाला है
And take them for
Sorry?
you can't take them for granted.
No, but I honestly think angel investors get a raw deal all the time because
Hmm.
once they've got the money and then they want the Series A, then it's like you're irrelevant. Then we need to talk to the big boys, the VCs. So who wants to talk to you? तुम कितना check लिखने वाले हो? So then you get a new set of SHAs where your rights disappear magically, and then the founder says, "Boss, please, यार मुझे पैसे तो चाहिए, इतना तो करो." So we've been kicked off the cap table multiple times,
Hmm.
especially by companies which are doing very well. Because hey, they're growing, so they want more. But that's fine. It doesn't bother me. Like I said before, okay, you know what? I back you. If you don't want me anymore, and I'm not adding any value to your life, I don't want to be a parasite, and I don't want to piggyback just because you're gonna. It's helpful actually. It's helpful because you can then tell people, hey, see, that was a unicorn I backed. See how smart I am. But I've stopped trying to impress anyone anymore now. It's okay.
That brings me to my next question, Dr. Malpani. We talked about what mistakes you've seen founders making. Are there any common characteristics you have seen across the portfolio of founders who've done really well? And really well might be a different definition for you from, what people generally have. But what are those traits, those characteristics you've seen in those founders that help them navigate their early journey, which was full of challenges, and actually see the day of light? The light of the day, right? They crossed that dark night, and they were able to make it. So, what were those characteristics you saw which were common across these founders?
In all fairness, it's hard to generalize because I think each of them has a different strength. So some of them had co-founders, who provided a complementary basis. Some of them were solo founders who had the courage of their convictions. That, this is what I'm going to do. I know I can pull it off. Some of them, frankly, I couldn't understand at all, and yet they did very well, which is fine. Some of them who I thought would do very well didn't do well at all. So I've kind of said, the way my life, my worldview now is, no one understands this space. Anyone who understands is just pretending. So, the trouble is we look up to all these VCs because they sign $1 million checks, but just because they sign $1 million checks doesn't mean that they know any more than what anyone else does, because actually their failure rate is as high as. So that's the way I look at myself. अरे यार इतने ये लोग इतना सारा MBAs है, इतना IIT से है, इतना सारा पैसा है, इतने सारे एक्सपर्ट्स है, कंसल्टेंट्स है, तो भी उनका फेलियर रेट हाई है, तो मैं किस खेत की मूली हूँ? Or they're going to make mistakes. I'm going to be very forgiving about that stuff. And I think that's the definition of a complex adaptive system. Startups are complex adaptive systems. You can never predict is it a competitor who's going to eat your lunch? Is it that same competitor who's going to buy you tomorrow and then give you a 10x valuation? Who knows any of this stuff? There's just so many moving parts my life is simple. I just break it up into two things: things I can control and things I can't control. And startups are not things I can control. The things I can control is whom to sign a check for. So we try to do a little bit of that. And then after that, boss, it's your life. Hopefully you won't cheat me. If you do cheat me, that's on you, not on me. And then just leave it at that. But it's been very exciting. It's honestly been a great journey. And I think part of that is also personal growth. I always tell people you need to lead life as a T-shaped model. As an IVF specialist, I'm very good at what I do. But after a few years, a lot of it is repetitive. You're doing the same thing again and again. So you get better and better at it. But, each patient is different. So it's very gratifying for every couple whom we manage to get pregnant. But then there are lots of other things which you then want to apply across other domains. So, what do I understand about AI? Nothing. What do I understand about fintech? Nothing. How do I get to learn about this stuff? By investing in these startups. Because before I invest, I need to make sure that this guy is not bullshitting me. And entrepreneurs are great bullshit artists. Let me warn you that. But how do you know whether you're getting bullshit or not? So then you need to do your homework. You need to read the books. You need to understand does this make sense? What are the red flags? And so therefore it becomes a positive virtuous cycle. I enjoy reading. I enjoy learning. But then it's no longer just doing it for the sake of doing it. I'm actually getting a chance to apply what I learn. So then it just becomes a lot more fun. And some of it also, I think, is VCs are very constrained. People don't realize that. But the moment you're spending other people's money, there are just 50 different pressures on you. You have to show growth, even if you fake it, even if it's just numbers or vanity metrics, you have to show, because you need to raise the next fund after 3 years. So how do you do that? So you phone another VC. अरे यार तो इसमें थोड़ा तो ले ले, उसका 3x तो वैल्यूएशन कर ले, अच्छी कंपनी है, हाँ ठीक है, अच्छा I'll swap with you, मैं तेरे कंपनी के भी थोड़े शेयर्स ले लेता हूँ, उसको भी मैं 2x वैल्यूएशन, so both of us are happy. We'll mark up our valuation, so all our LPs are happy, the world is happy, the startup media will say how bright VCs are because sabka valuation बढ़ गया है. So it's a game. It's fun watching the game being played. It doesn't bother me anymore because that's not the game I'm playing. It amuses me sometimes to see the game being played. And I'm much more focused on educating entrepreneurs to have realistic expectations. And I enjoy doing that. As a doctor, a lot of my job description is educating patients. So they have realistic expectations कि डॉक्टर के हाथ में कितना है, पेशेंट के हाथ में कितना है, और फिर ऊपर वाला मालिक. And it's honestly true for startups. Entrepreneur के हाथ में इतना है, get the team, do the breast, whatever. Investor के हाथ में इतना है, पैसा दे सकता है, नहीं दे सकता, whatever. But at the end of the day, you believe in God or whatever else you want to believe in. But so much of it is just this thing. So to that extent, and I always tell people, actually, IVF specialists make good angel investors. We're
Hmm.
used to failure because most IVF cycles fail. We have to be empathetic because most of these patients, when the cycle fails, are going to cry on my shoulder. So I need to be able to understand that. And a lot of it is making sure that they have realistic expectations. And we try to do that. And that's the reason I'm so active on social media. That's the reason I was so active on LinkedIn, for example. Because
Hmm.
I saw a lot of stuff. And the reason is because you would read all these books and you would have all these hype books like blitz scaling and 0 to 1 and stuff. Great books, great story books. But how much of it do you actually apply? Very little, in my opinion. And then you would read all the sensible books, books on prototyping, books on, how do you actually do some of this stuff, design thinking, stuff which everyone can implement. And that's the stuff I was really talking about. Very boring stuff, but still things which I think people need to know. So, like I said, I think it's happy. And the good thing about learning is you get to teach. The good thing about teaching is you get to learn. So then it just keeps on going on. And I'm fairly vocal about it. So I often will say things which other people think but don't have the courage to say openly. And you pay the price for that, of course, uh,
Correct.
which is fine. I'm not very popular. I don't expect to be also.
No, no, you are. You, in fact, are very, very popular. And that is mostly because of your unfiltered approach to sharing your opinion. I
But
think one.
it's not a smart thing to do, Anuradha. Let me tell you.
No, no,
No,
but
I
you
said at this stage in my life,
can
honestly, I can do it. The only
afford to do that.
sorry.
You can afford to do that at
I
this.
was gonna tell people that at this stage in my life, I could choose to be politically correct and uh, brown nose people in power and rub people's stroke their egos and stuff and everything else. And that's one way of doing it. But honestly, at this stage in my life, I have enough money. What am I going to do with it all anyway? And I care more about my self-esteem than you know, stroking other people's egos. So
Correct.
right now I'm okay. So I'm not even suggesting anyone else do what I do, but
Hmm.
it works for me.
No, but one thing that I've learned from you, and one thing that you've always encouraged me, and I'm sure the other portfolio founders also, is to share as much as possible. And this is what you've been telling us, that this is what Indian startup ecosystem at least lacks. We all think that, whatever we know is our property and we should protect it. We shouldn't share it because, someone else will pick up our ideas and make something bigger, or our competition will benefit, etc. And that's all bullshit. And you should write as much as you can about what you know. And that's been very helpful because that's how you make meaningful connections. That's how you multiply your knowledge as well. This is something that you have consistently done. And like you mentioned somewhere in your thing, was that when someone comes up to you and asks for a solution to a problem, you do not try to give the person gyan, but rather direct him in the right direction, him or her in the right direction, by sharing the books that are relevant to solve that problem. So that's.
So I think everything you're saying is right. I'm a big believer in personal branding. I'm a
Hmm.
big believer, and I think the best way to create a personal brand for yourself is to do it digitally online. It doesn't
Correct.
have to be, you should be on all the social media platforms. But
Hmm.
आज का Twitter कल क्या होने वाला है किसको मालूम? आज LinkedIn है कल क्या होने वाला? It doesn't matter. But if it's your own website, and we're actually encouraging students, create your own website. It doesn't matter if you're 10 years old. It's so easy to do. It literally takes 5 minutes. And
Hmm.
kids are articulate and they like having it and showing off and all that good stuff. And this is proof of work. This is going to stand you in good stead throughout, and it actually becomes a positive virtue cycle because then you look for things to talk about, you look for things to share, and then you start exploring all kinds of media. Array, his website is better. How did he do that? How can I use this? How can I make my life easier? What are the AI tools available? You stop being a consumer, you start being a creator. And that's something which we tell everyone, and especially for entrepreneurs. I always tell people if your idea is so simple that someone's going to be able to rip it off, then stealth mode is the stupidest thing you can do because the moment you release it, you will have 100 people doing it anyway. And your competitor is the one who's mostly going to do it, irrespective of anything else. So you can only protect how you implement. You can't really protect an idea. And I always tell people, idea chahiye na, मैं तुझको 1,000 ideas दूंगा, free में दूंगा, doesn't matter. But people are so possessive and all that is very myopic. So anyone who asks me, sign an NDA, I said, boss, go find another. So that just makes my life a lot easier. I don't even engage with those entrepreneurs because that's all very unrealistic. But I think when you build in public, like you correctly said, lots of things happen magically. Your
Hmm.
ability to communicate improves dramatically because you start using metaphors, you start telling stories, you create videos, you create whatever else you want, different ways of getting your message across. And being able to communicate is extremely important. You then act as a role model for the other people in your team. अरे ये करता है तो हमको भी करना है. You can push them, add them to their KPIs or whatever. So they start doing it. So then it has a multiplicative effect.
Hmm.
Quality is going to progress. The only way to improve is to actually do it. So you'll cringe when you see some of your first posts after 5 years. That's fine. But this is a digital asset. You can always edit, delete, upgrade whatever you want. So all that is stuff. This is stuff you can share with your grandkids at some point. I mean, there's just so many reasons to want to do. It's a great way of attracting investors.
Hmm.
And the right way to attract investors is when you don't want them. So when I read someone's post, oh wow, this guy's smart. He's got a great insight in how to sell to schools, for example. Why don't I reach out to him? And I've done that. And you know that from personal experience that, a lot of the way I find entrepreneurs to fund is through social media channels because they say something counterintuitive, something which I didn't know. So I said, I have an opportunity to learn from this particular person. And, building in public also helps because it helps you attract the right talent, the right employees.
Hmm.
Because then people will say, oh, wow, I've already done this, or why don't I? So, just so many different things. So, I'm a big believer in building it public. And I think a lot of people do it extremely well. And that actually bothers me about Indians. Think about it. How many people graduate from, let's say, Stanford Medical School? 40. How many people graduate from JJ Medical College every year? 200.
Hmm.
If all these 200 medical students had their own website, I mean, just imagine the amount of digital clout this country would have. Then you
Hmm.
would have content in local languages and all these. I'm not saying everyone's going to be very good. It doesn't matter really. But out of those, some will become much better. I mean, that's fine. But at least everyone needs to start. So honestly, if I was the Minister of Education, that's the only condition I would put. Every school, every teacher, and every student needs to have their own website. What they do with their website, I don't care. But the fact is, the moment you put up a website, it's
Hmm.
your alter ego. Then you
Hmm.
will not put up a shabby website because, boss, this is about me. I will improve it. I mean, that's the way all of us are. But that's what I would love to do, really.
Fun fact for the audience, this is how I met Dr. Malpani. I commented on one of his posts and I sent him a message, a DM on LinkedIn, and that's how we connected, and that's how we ended up investing in my startup Multibhashi. Fun fact number two, I started this podcast on Dr. Malpani's insistence. When I told him that I've joined Dexter Ventures, this is the first thing he told me, you need to start a podcast, Anuradha. And one of the reasons why he insisted me on doing it is probably because that is one way of pushing others to share content. Like they might be lazy, they may not write a post on their own, but when they come to a podcast like this, they will have to share their learnings, right? So you've always lived by what you believe in, Dr. Malpani. And in a way, you've started answering the question I was going to ask you next, which is if you have to share any advice with someone who's been thinking about starting up. So most of the audience, people who'd be listening to this podcast are people who are enthusiastic about starting a startup or who have just started working on their idea, but they're clueless how to go about it. What are a few suggestions you would give to such people? One you've already given, that start sharing your content, start building a personal brand. What are the others?
I would say hustle and run a side hustle. Even if you're working in a job, let's be honest, enough, most of us can finish whatever the work is required. Most of it is gada majuri. You have a lot of spare time. Use that spare time to run a side hustle. You don't have to do it on the sly. You can let your boss. And we actually encourage our employees to do that. And
Hmm.
it's great because their worldview changes. They understand what it's like to run a business. They understand what it's like. They understand the bigger picture. And I'm not worried if they're so successful that they move on. Good for them. We'll find someone else. I'm a big believer that actually don't just think about this stuff. And anyone who tells me I don't have the money, I don't have the time is a loser by definition. Everyone has the money to be able to do what they want to do. Let's be honest. You have money to go watch a movie, then you have enough money to start a website. I mean, just that kind of stuff. You don't have time, then you have time to watch When you was on TV, you always have time. My point is, you always have time and money to do whatever you want to do. That's the reality. Just a question of prioritizing. And you don't have to, it's okay to think big, but you
Hmm.
always have to start small. And it's okay. So the simplest thing to do is, like I said, start a side hustle, start a website, become a freelancer, explore these things, and and don't try to determine the outcome in advance, because that's not something you can do. Can I predict what I'm going to be, where I'm going to be 2 years from now? Obviously, I can't. And I hope I'm not going to be the same Dr. Malpani today, 2 years from now, which I am today. I hope I will have evolved, become more interesting, because life will have taught me additional things. And the reality is, we reinvent ourselves all the time. So keep an open mind, remain a learning machine. And the great thing today is, thanks to the internet, no one has an excuse to say, I can't learn. Honestly, I think that's just terrible. It's just a question of the determination and the motivation. So, and one thing I say is, read a lot, because all that, my point is, someone somewhere has solved your problem.
Hmm.
Some other country, in some other domain, in some, so you don't have to reinvent. You have to adapt the wheel. You don't have to reinvent it. So, someone's created a wheel, maybe you need to put a rubber tire on it. I don't know. But that stuff you're going to have to be able to do. So you start where someone else has left off and then take it to the next level. So all these things are very easy to do. So there's really no excuse. And you may find, boss, ye mere bas ki baat nahi hai. I don't like the answer. Then don't do it. No one's forcing you to do it. But until you experiment, until you flavor, and it's much easier to do it when you're young, because the risks you're taking are much less, because you don't have additional family responsibilities and stuff. Everyone always, so the number of wannabe entrepreneurs is 100 to 1. They always have some excuse. They have all these great ideas, and then you meet them after 3 years, and what happened? Nothing happened. Or you meet them
Yeah.
after, hey, but that guy did it, and I thought about it earlier. First,
Hmm.
congratulations. No one's going to give you any gold medals for the ideas. I keep on reminding them. It's also very helpful to do internships,
Hmm.
very helpful to join a startup. If you want to do it free, go ahead, take this thing, and be proactive. Think about, where can I add value to that startup founder's life. So I think the commonest mistake people do when they're looking for jobs is they look for what's advertised on Naukri.
Hmm.
Worst way of finding the job, because there are 1,000 people applying for that same job. So the HR, their only job is to throw away 999 resumes in the waste basket, because honestly, they go crazy. Therefore, you need to create your own jobs. Everyone says, how the hell do you do that? Because the reality is, it's not the recruiter who has the control, it's the hiring manager.
Hmm.
And what is a hiring manager? Someone who has a need. And sometimes they don't even know they have the need. And then you can tell them, hey, you're doing this, but you know what? You're not doing this very well. Or why don't I do this for you? And what's the worst thing which will happen? He won't give you the job, but you will still have learned. And then you can repackage and repurpose and create a post. And you can do things like, if I were head of design at TCS, or if
Hmm.
I were the education minister, or if I were this, or I were that, or whatever. And people have actually got jobs doing this.
Correct.
They've created dummy pitch decks, they've
Hmm.
created all kinds of things, and this shows that you're thinking for yourself. So I think,
So,
honestly, this, what
yeah.
I love about the internet is, it's now become a democratic playing field,
Hmm.
literally. So I don't know whether you know about this. Have you heard of Anna's Archive?
Mm-hmm.
So I tell everyone, world's largest free library. It's
And
called Anna's-archive.org. So it's got all the books, full text. It's called a shadow library. Now
hmm.
everyone says, "Oh God, isn't that piracy? Isn't that unethical?" All
Hmm.
that stuff, and I have very good reasons to believe that. I think that's fine. I think it's the publishers who are actually unethical, because they're the ones who keep all the money. They don't give money to the author, and they overcharge so much that people can't afford it. And these are all these Americans who now talk about intellectual property rights. And 100 years ago, these same Americans were the ones who would pirate all the British books, because that time they were a developing poor country. And now when they've become a rich country, they always want to change. It says, no, ye nahi karna chahiye. Very hypocritical. And I love people like Anna's Archive. They've got the courage to say that the purpose of the internet was to make knowledge available and accessible. So why
Hmm.
should you lock it up in all these silos? These books are so expensive. Who can afford them? And the moment you do that, so I think, once you have a PC with an internet connection, and once you have Anna's Archive, and obviously all the 50 other things, whether it's YouTube University or Twitter University or whatever else you want, there is no reason for you to say, I cannot learn.
Very well said. Agreed. So, Dr. Malpani, now we'll quickly move into a section in our podcast which we call rapid fire. I'll be asking you questions and you can answer them as briefly as possible in a couple of lines. So, the first one is three traits that you look for in a founding team.
Preferably those who bootstrapped, because I understand that they're frugal. Preferably those who I said are a little bit mature, because they've been there, done that, learned through their life experiences. And someone who understands the investor's perspective and point of view and respects and trusts me. And I think that happens, I think I'm fine, irrespective of what the final outcome is.
Okay. It is said that you are the average of 5 people you spend most time with. Who are those 5 people in your life?
Most of the people I spend the most time with are online, very honestly. So I'm actually a very antisocial person, let me tell you that. I'm not very good at small talk and stuff like that. I usually tell even my patients, I said, don't come for a consultation. I mean, I earn from the consultation, but if I can answer your question by email, let me answer it by email. The signal to noise ratio is much better. It's all documented. It's easy. I can refer you to sites and stuff like that. So honestly, that's just what my comfort level is. So I hang out with a lot of books. I hang out with a lot of authors, across the ages and stuff like that. So most of the people I hang out with are the people who give me ideas more than, physical.
I was actually looking forward to hear Dr. Anjali's name for sure. That is one. Who are the other 4 people? Even if they're online, at least name them. Give them some credit on the podcast.
So I learn from, so I learn a lot from Manish, for example, who manages this thing. I learn a lot from Dhruv, who manages some of the startup stuff. I learn a lot from the startup founder. I learn a lot from the social impact entrepreneurs. I don't necessarily want to name names because I'm not trying to this thing, but quite honestly, and they excite me because these guys have vision which is 10 years ahead of mine. That just gives me so much and so much hope for the future. That this country is not going to go to the dogs. I mean,
I think for you, those 5 people keep changing because you talk to so many people, and sometimes with a particular founder, you'd be engaged more over a certain period of time than another founder.
I told you I'm not going to be the same person 2 years from now. I'd be a very boring person if that happened. So the same thing, I would expect that some of that would keep on changing. And if you think about it, a lot of when you say you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with, let's stop a minute and think about what you mean by that. Do you think like that? Do you wear the same clothes they wear? Do you go to the same places they hang out or what? Well, usually it means you share the same set of ideas. And for me, a lot of my ideas don't come from conversation. I'm not very good at thinking on my feet. I forget half of what people say. I tend to talk very fast. I tend to interrupt other people. I don't let them complete conversations, 50 other things. I'm not a very good conversation. But when things are written, it's a lot easier for me. So again, that's just my personal preference.
Okay, next one. Where do you see Malpani Ventures 5 years from now?
I would actually like it to be self-sustaining in the sense, when Dr. Malpani is dead and gone, then you'll have created. Of course, I mean, that's fine. So my whole point is I call myself a catalyst. And the definition of a catalyst is optional. Once you've served your purpose, you should move out and let other people do that. I'm very comfortable with that role, honestly. So, for example, in Apni Pathshala, which is the social impact, we want our students to be the heroes. We don't want the teachers to be the heroes. We don't want, because ultimately, why are we doing this? We're doing it for the sake of our students. And it's exactly the same thing. My biggest problem with the social impact entrepreneurs is they're not willing to speak up. They're not willing to, some of them are very retiring. Some of them are, my work will speak for itself. Of course, your work will speak for itself, but it'll take 10 years for that to happen. Perfectly okay to trumpet your own. If you don't do it, no one else is going to do it for you. So I think a lot of these things are stuff which we say, the problem is the bad players are the guys who hire Shah Rukh Khan. Not naming any names, or I can't name, sorry, kidding. But who will hire Shah Rukh Khan and go and spend all that money? And all the good guys who do all the work don't get any of the encouragement, which I'm not saying publicize yourself because you're looking for a pat on the back. Do it because that's how people will get to know about the work which you're doing. And that sometimes, and that just boils down to build in public, share in public, all that same stuff. So I think a lot of this is gradually going to start changing. And I think Indians are bright. I think, thanks to internet speeds, that's changed, thanks to the ability of the PC, so many things. So I'm very optimistic. I think our generation pretty much messed up. Hopefully,
So you're saying you don't care too much about, any vanity metrics for Malpani Ventures, but as long as Malpani Ventures keeps following the same ethos and keeps working for the good, you're sorted.
Perfect. I think you said that exactly very well. Who do you keep vanity metrics for? Because you need to show off to someone else. And
Hmm.
that's why I said that's the constraint, because then they need to show off to their LPs. I don't need to show off to Dr. Anjali. I've been married too long, so I don't think she's going to do this thing. So, well, there's really no one else. And I know, for example, I raise a lot of hackles. I mean, I know that when I say what I say, people get polarized, and this guy's an idiot, and he doesn't know how to be diplomatic, and he wants to tilt at windmills and all that Don Quixote stuff, and that's fine. At some point, that's the way I do things. Will anything happen? No. But at least I tried. मरने के बाद ऐसा नहीं लगना चाहिए. मरने के बाद क्या होगा किसको मालूम. But at least on your deathbed, you should never feel I wish I'd done this. And I made lots of messes in my life, but I still don't regret them, because I think at that point in my life, that was the right decision for me to make. It didn't work out well. Didn't work out well. I mean, that's fine. Couldn't have done much about the outcome. I followed the right process. I was true to my conscience, and I did whatever I could do. So
That's how you lead a peaceful life.
it's not always peaceful. Not when you get sued in Delhi High Court for 10 crores for defaming people. So it's not always peaceful. But that's fine. I mean, these are battles I'm picking and choosing. So I think that's okay. So will there be consequences? Yes. And am I willing to suffer those consequences? Yes. Because I'm doing it with good intent. So I'm okay. Some of that makes other people uncomfortable. Why are you taking panga with all these guys? Tera kya jata hai? You're right. Mera kuch nahi jata hai. I'm rich. I'm well off. I can lead a very happily retired life. Uh, I'm not competing with anyone for anything else, but I care. And if we can't fix what's going to happen to the next generation, what's going to happen to the country? And that's the reason why I'm focusing so much on education these days. So for example, for the entire healthcare, I don't talk to doctors, because good doctors don't need to be told anything. They'll do the right stuff. Bad doctors don't improve no matter what you tell them. So why waste your energy on them? So our focus in IVF is on educating patients so they can find the right doctors. Fine, then you're sorted. So what is our focus in education is, what do we do to put students first? I'm not an anti-capitalist. Please understand that. I'm beyond capitalism. And people don't understand that difference. I'm a compassionate capitalist. Because when you're only a capitalist, all you care about is profiteering and how much money I make. And that's not sustainable. You get too greedy at some point, the regulators will come after you, or your competitors will want to have a lunch. But if you're a compassionate capitalist who puts the users first, you'll be able to grow sustainably. You'll be able to grow in a way where you're proud of the way which you've grown. And then you'll create a moat which other people will not be able to replicate, because not everyone necessarily thinks or believes the same way you do. So that's what my focus, and that's the role model I want to be, that I believe. So therefore, we have multiple buckets. We have a charity bucket, we have an experimental bucket, we have a sustainable, fine, we'll give you the money, but figure out ways to make it. And even with a lot of these social impact entrepreneurs, I expect them to be far more profitable than my regular. Has that worked out? Not yet. Will it work out? Who knows? But the reason I believe it will work out is we're providing them with financial capital. The human capital is excellent, Aurora. You know that. The kind of people you hired at Multibashi would not leave because someone gave them 10% or 20% more. They cared about you. They cared about their users. And their social capital is much better because people understand कि ये अच्छा काम कर रहा है. So I honestly think at some point, maybe after the 5 years, we'll have another podcast and I'll say, see, I told you what I was right. Or maybe I'll say, you will say, yo, you were an idiot. Everything you said was wrong.
No, your body of work is really amazing, Dr. Malpani. So the next question is, one thing you want to change about the startup ecosystem in India, and I know you can talk at length about this, but please keep it brief.
I think we need to respect bootstrapped entrepreneurs much more. That's it. I wouldn't say anything else. I think I hate it when we call bootstrapped entrepreneurs in a pejorative sense. Oh, it's a lifestyle business. These are guys who are adding value, whether they're giving employment to 10 people or 50 people, how does it matter? And this is not money which is going off to China LPs or US LPs. This is money which is staying in the country. And this is money which now has a ripple effect. Because if you do a good job with 10, then your employees' kids will perhaps, take inspiration. This is local community growth. So that's what this thing would be. We need to respect bootstrapped entrepreneurs, because hopefully they're the ones who will create these SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, who don't care about vanity metrics. They run a boring dhanda, but they're the ones who add value to the community. This is not money which gets exported in the form of dividends or whatever else to foreign institutional investors or foreign VCs or whatever else. That bothers me. So
Got
there's a fancy word for it. You want to hear it? No, I don't want to
Please,
impress you. No,
please.
but the word is called non-ergodic. The
Okay.
reason it's a fancy word is because the reality is the startup ecosystem is random. It's stochastic is the fancy word because no one can predict what will happen. But what does that mean? So there are two kinds of randomness. In one, what is called ensemble randomness, everyone has the same result. In ergodic, some will have a very different result from others. It's
Okay.
like Russian roulette. Russian roulette is non-ergodic. Either you die or you win. If you win, you win a lot. But if you die, you get nothing. And this is the problem with all these foreign VCs because they've got an inbuilt edge, because their cost of capital is much lower, because their brand name is much more, because they can sell much more. So, for example, Indians get fascinated by all these sequoias and YCs and stuff like that. But I have a lot more respect for a bootstrapped entrepreneur. He had the courage, put his money where his mouth is, and did enough with what he had in order to create value for the consumer. This is the guy whom I would really respect. That's where a startup ecosystem should make heroes of.
Got it. 3 investors you look up to and why?
Uh, so one would have been Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. He no longer is this thing that, great guy, trader, investor, multiple
Yes.
ways. The other one I have a lot of regards for in the listed spaces, Mr. Radhakishan Damani. That's my idea of an ethical, just think about it. Earned his own money from investing, trading, whatever, and then deployed it. So he owns most of DMart and he's, rich beyond anyone's wildest dreams. And he's done it ethically and he's done it for the sake of the consumer. And the other guy I have a lot of regard for is the Zoho fellow.
Okay.
Again, walks his talk, love the fact that he cares about India, Indian villages, doesn't believe in all the glamour and the show and the stuff like that. So
Got it. 3 founders you idolize and why? I think Sridhar Vembu from Zoho became answer to both. So one is done. 2 more.
but why wouldn't you say the same thing even for because Rakesh Jhunjhunwala started Rare all these guys created institutions.
But you need new names, Dr. Malpani. I allowed you one.
But part of it, so a lot of these guys are guys you don't know of yet. And with a lot of these brand name guys, I don't know enough about them to be able to say I respect them or I don't respect them. So there are lots of great things about, let's say, Nitin Kaman. I love the way Zerodha has grown, but in general, I don't like trading. I don't think that's a great way of encouraging people. And then that's the way he makes his money. So I have a little bit of mixed feelings, if you know what I'm saying. He does say this thing, but is that necessarily the right way? So I don't think I have very easy.
I'd like to pass this question. Okay, we'll move to the next.
Okay.
An interesting white space where Indian founders are not solving for right now. An interesting problem for which no one is solving, and it could be a good startup idea.
I think people are forgetting that things like healthcare and education need to be local. 90% of healthcare problems can be solved locally. And that's what you always used to do. You had a family doctor. All that's gone. Now everyone's just interested in building these white elephants, these palaces with 5-star corporate hospitals and stuff. I don't think that's great. That's great for a very small percentage of patients. So that's one. The same thing applies to education. You want to create these fancy physical campuses like all these Ivy Leagues, Ashoka University and stuff. They're designed to keep people out. They're not designed to encourage people to learn. And I think that's an obsolete mechanism. The learning should happen where the student is. The education should come to where the student is. Why do you want to take the student out from his home? So multiple things. Hopefully we'll get there.
You're saying localized, hyper-personalized offerings in both education and healthcare.
Absolutely, because I don't think the government can fix this problem. I don't think the existing VC system can, because there isn't enough money to be made. But I think this is what really the consumer wants. And if we come up with clever enough models, so I'd much rather have a chain of very, very small community health centers. No one's come up with that. I mean, for multiple different reasons. But I'm still hopeful someone will open source the model. That's what we're trying with the Apni Pathshala.
Correct.
We're saying, I'm spending the money, I'm going to make all these mistakes. And at the end of it, we will have learned this hardware works, this doesn't work. This is what worked for us. तुमको franchise करना है, जो करना है करो. We'll see.
Correct. The next question is going to be extremely hard for you, Dr. Malpani, because you would. I'm going to ask you for 3 choices, but you would have 300 in your mind. So the next question is top 3 books you would recommend to founders.
Then I would have to. Honestly, the books also change. And that's not surprising. So my personal preference is actually for older books because these are the books which I call anti-fragile. These are books which have stood the test of time. But what I actually try to do is I try to tailor the book for where the entrepreneur is stuck, very honestly. So I don't really necessarily want to provide a generic kind of this thing. And most of the books I like are usually the ones which aren't very necessarily very popular or mainstream or whatever, like partly because they talk about the importance of not depending on external investors, being able to, figure out stuff. And those aren't the books which VCs are going to promote. Those aren't the books which go on talk shows or which, get press releases, because by definition, these guys are doing it for themselves. So
give us some names like that.
Can I look it up?
Yes, please. Yes.
Give me a second.
It's okay. We'll edit it out. Go ahead and search if you want to.
And as usual, my computer won't work.
Sorry. No, it will.
So I actually do. I must tell you some of the experiments we're running. One of the things we're running is putting a chatbot on Malpani Ventures and Indian Angels. And we're feeding that chatbot with all this information. So when people ask me these questions, and they won't, like I told you, I don't like talking to people. I'll make an exception in your case, Anuradha, but most of the time. So when people ask me these questions, hopefully they already have been answered.
It answers to them on your chatbot.
Yes, exactly. And my chatbot is going to be much more patient.
You know what I'm excited about, Dr. Malpani? This episode is going to go on LinkedIn. And people miss you on LinkedIn like anything. So it would be great if you could give them an answer yourself, like they can hear you speaking.
But you know what? I will tell you, it's not like I've given up on LinkedIn. Our case is still going on in Mumbai High Court.
We all look forward to you winning the case and coming back to LinkedIn.
Who knows what will work. So again, I'm just nailing some of it. There's one called Nail It, Then Scale It. This is the entrepreneur's guide to creating content. And where did it go? I'm trying to look for the name
of the author.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah, but that's one of it. And again, that's something which really makes a lot of sense to me. How does it? It's called. I think it's Ali Ash and Hassan Kuba. It's The Unfair Advantage.
Okay.
Basically, it's about how you already have what it takes to succeed. So he's not telling you, hey, go look for investors or stuff like this. You already have, and then you need to be able to identify it. So that's one set. Nail It, Then Scale It is another book. The Unfair Advantage is by Ash, Ali, and Hassan Kuba.
Okay.
Nail It, Then Scale It is The Entrepreneur's Guide to Creating Innovation. It's by Nathan Furr.
Okay.
That's the other one. Then a lot of the ones which inspire me are ones which are written by social impact entrepreneurs, which aren't necessarily relevant to this thing. A lot of the ones I really like are the failure stories. There are great book. There's a great comic book. So typically when someone asks me, then I have to look it up and then find the title. So people say, "God, you're getting old." So I said, that's okay. When people asked Albert Einstein his phone number, he said, give me a minute. Let me look up the telephone directory and find out where the phone number is. I think that's okay, as long as I can find the information. A great book is Effectual Entrepreneurship by Stuart Reed.
Can you repeat that for us?
Effectual Entrepreneurship by Stuart Reed. So what I would want to suggest is perhaps, and one request for the podcast, break it up into smaller pieces because people have short attention spans and no one wants to listen to Dr. Malpani go yap, except for Anuradha. But the second thing is make sure you have a transcript.
We do.
It's quite easy. It's quite easy to do that. And within the transcript, please include links to names and whatever else, and then have a way of interacting. So that when someone listens to this thing, then they have more questions to ask me. Because I think that interactivity element is something which makes all this stuff so exciting. Because with a book, it's done and dusted. Whereas with a podcast, it's not, what are the other questions? Or, what else would you have liked me to ask the next host? And that's something, and that's the entire idea, what I call an unconference. That you don't hold a conference and invite speakers to talk about what speakers want to talk about. You ask the people who are attending the conference, what do you want to learn? Who would you like us to invite? I think that's where everything is so messed up. It's like a hospital. The doctor should be the least important person. It's a service profession. It should be the patient, but the patient is the last. It's just like a school. The student should be the most important, but everything is designed around the teacher. So I think that's some of this thing. Again, lots of them again. In fact, and the good thing about all these books is once you get one book, then it refers you to two others, then it refers you. So one really good one is called The Minimalist Entrepreneur by Sahib Abhingia. And the beauty is once you get this book, they refer you to others. So then it starts you, and a lot of these books will refer to older books. Are brilliant because they're not the flavor of the year, and because blitzscaling has come and gone. These books have stood the test of time. So that's fun. And the great thing is you can now start following these authors on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on their website, on their podcast. That's how you keep on learning. So that's something which I really enjoy.
Great. We are at the end of our podcast, Dr. Malpani. Thank you so much. And when you talk with so much passion. I can see why you enjoy spending time with entrepreneurs. You would be able to relate with the energy they have.
No, thank you. That's really so kind of you. But you're absolutely right. Because I'll tell you one problem with getting older, especially as a doctor. Once you cross a particular age, you start bitching. ये सब यंग डॉक्टर्स है, कुछ आता नहीं है, ये सब पेशेंट्स है, कुछ अप्रिशिएट नहीं करते, ये सब जजेस है, उनको तो कुछ दिमाग नहीं है, लेकिन सबके ऊपर कुछ भी हो गया तो नेग्लिजेंस डाल के डॉक्टर को जेल में डालेंगे। ये हमारे जमाने में हम इतना सब पढ़ाई करते थे, सीखते थे, हम इतना सब करते थे, the world is going to the dogs and all that standard stuff. And obviously, like you said, if you then hang out with 5 other people like this, you're going to start doing exactly the same thing. Then you're going to bitch and moan and complain and stuff like that. The moment you hang out with young entrepreneurs, your worldview changes completely. These guys are so optimistic. They have hope for the future. And then the great thing about being rich is that you can then put your money where your mouth is. So quite happy to do that.
Amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Dr. If you have
Thank
any
you so
other
much,
suggestions, if you want to edit out anything, let me know. Happy to do it.
No. I don't think it's a good idea to edit out anything. We should always do the, this is what it is.
Candid version.
Yeah. Unvarnished. जो है वो है, सच दिखता है. You like it, that's great. You don't like it, that's great too.
Cool. Done.